I'm Rabbi Jay Karzan.
And I'm Rabbanit Ruby Ray Karzan.
And Tape with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're going to see Rabbi Doug. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. We're going to see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug. Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. I have with me today two authors of the book Sharon, Israel's Warrior Politician. This is a biography about Ariel Sharon, Prime Minister of Israel. And I want to welcome my guests. They are Anita Miller and Jordan Miller, two of the three authors of Sharon, Israel's Warrior Politician. And welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
What brings a couple of people from the North Shore, the suburban Chicago area, to write a biography about Ariel Sharon?
Well, the fact is that we were approached by our third author, Sigalit Zitouni, whose father back in 1972 had published a biography of Sharon. He was a very heroic figure at the time, as he still is, and especially then. And he said, well, all we needed to do was to bring it up to date. Easier said than done. So we set to work, the three of us, did research and wrote the book and brought it up to date.
Is her father, did he author this book in Hebrew originally?
It was originally published in Hebrew, yes. It was by an officer, a colleague of Sharon's, a military officer, who used a nom de plume, actually, because he didn't want people to know who he was. And it was very praiseworthy, not to say a hagiography. So we had to pretty much rewrite it and add a tremendous amount of material, of course.
Very interesting. What is your connection to Sigalit that she approached the two of you to be involved in this, Anita?
Well, actually, they're printers. She works in her father's printing establishment, and so they printed a lot of books. We're book publishers, and they've done a lot of work for us. And her father had published books in Israel, and he was eager to get this thing back in print. He knew that it needed work, because it had originally been written in Hebrew and then translated into English, the first part of it, the 72 part, in South Africa. And it was a pretty bad job, so that had to be rewritten.
To take this book and rewrite it, and as you have, I see the original author's name is not on the title of the authors.
No.
How is it that person does not have credit with the three of you being the authors?
Well, first of all, it was a work for hire that Mr. Zitouni, Joseph Zitouni, hired him to write it. Mm-hmm. So the book belongs to the Zitounis. And second of all, we don't even know his name. So that's why, the book has been credited. But
we cite the book as a source, as a main source for the early part of the book.
Very nice, very nice. Have either of you ever met Ariel Sharon in person?
No.
Has Sigalit ever met Ariel Sharon in person?
I don't think she has.
She goes to Israel often, but she hasn't.
She knows people who know him.
Very nice. Well, at the beginning of the book, you mentioned Prime Minister Sharon's strong-willed Zionistic parents. You note their willingness to go against the flow of their neighbors' beliefs, especially in their following of Jabotinsky, anti-Ben Gurion politics, and so on. How strong is this influence still today for Ariel Sharon, would you say?
I don't. I think that's pretty in his past. I think what the influence is the strongest is what he went through in his teenage years, and when Israel became a state, the fact that he had to protect his father's property from militants or whatever you want to call them now, and that he grew up under these strenuous circumstances. I think this is what really developed him and traumatized him almost. So that's why he's got a reputation as a hardliner. But his father's connection with Jabotinsky, I don't think. As far as the Irgun and that sort of thing was concerned, he says in his autobiography that he was sympathetic, but he didn't believe in that kind of terrorist activity, and he could never join that.
Interesting.
But he has had an obsessive concern about Israel's security his entire life. I mean, his entire life is really a sort of a paradigm of the history of Israel. He's fought virtually every war. So he's a very hardened person, but a very intelligent one. He was a brilliant tactician in war. He really created the commando concept, helped to build a ragtag group of Israelis into a real army. And of course, he's been intent all his life that Israeli security be primary, and it has been.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. You note that at 21 years old, Ariel Sharon, as he's fondly called, has many disappointments in the defeats during Israel's War of Independence in 1948, especially the Latrun disasters and Latrun. And do these lessons from then still shape his thinking? Do you think he still has those disappointments in the back of his mind when he makes decisions today?
I think the thing the biggest problem he has that he remembers is the Lebanon episode. The other stuff, he was very young and he did make a lot of mistakes, but I don't think that haunts him. I think what upsets him the most is the Lebanon episode.
Mm-hmm. You state that Sharon has changed his views since he was a general. Now that he's prime minister, but the book doesn't say how he changed his views. How has he really changed his views? What has changed? When he was a general, what was his point of view and his thinking on his ruling and his desires? And today as prime minister, how has that changed?
Well, he's obviously. I think we did. Originally, he thought that the Palestinians. He'd say things like Amman is their capital, not Jerusalem. So the whole idea of a Palestinian state would have been complete anathema to him. He wanted them all to go back, to go to Jordan, and he's changed his mind about that completely. Mm-hmm. He no longer. Now he is willing to give them something like 40% of the land, an independent, a sort of semi-independent entity, which the borders will have to sort of belong to Israel, but they could rule themselves within that entity. So he's changed his mind considerably about that. He accepts the idea of a Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm. His son Omri, his oldest son Omri, who is his principal advisor really, has had a leavening effect on his thinking. He says that Omri is responsible for making him see that everything is in black and white, that there are shades of gray. And Omri has had a very good relationship with Palestinians, and he was a sort of a minister without portfolio. He had no official status in the government. And he used Omri to liaise with Palestinians, to talk negotiations, to talk peace. And the labor people were very upset about this, and they said, you can't use him, he's not an official of the government, you must stop doing it. So, that's fairly typical in Israeli politics, I'm afraid.
Don't you think with what's been going on as of recent and the complete breakdown of everything that his views again have changed? You mentioned that he accepts the fact that there should be a Palestinian state. I'm not so sure from reading his recent statements that he's ready to say that he's ready to accept that at this point.
Oh, not at this point, no. At this point, he's not going to accept that until he has somebody on the other side that he can trust and that he can negotiate with. At this point, there isn't anyone. And then there's the element of Hamas and the terrorists. So, no, at this point, he can't. But he would, I'm sure, if there was somebody there that he could relate to.
Work with.
That's the problem, of course. If Arafat 2 years ago had the control, and there's a question whether he actually did, enough control to say, I can negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians, meaning Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and all the others. But if he could do it then, he chose not to. Now, he can't do it. So the question is, it's very nice to talk peace, and we all want it, to be sure. But with whom do you discuss it? Who is the authority that can bring that?
Well, I think one of the biggest breaks in the Likud party is the intention of Netanyahu, who's stating, we need to get Arafat out of here, and Sharon who's saying, hold off, sending him away isn't the right answer right now. Do you think that Sharon is saying this because of political considerations, or do you think that if he could just have his way, he'd have him out of there?
I think he probably would have him out of there. I think that's what he sort of said. or he's got to balance a lot of his base is very, very right-wing, the settlers and so on. He says that he would like to have him out of there, but he can't do it because of Bush, and he's got a good relationship with Bush, or he believes he does in any case. So it's hard to say what he really thinks, but I think he would like to get rid of Arafat any way he could, but he can't right now.
Well, politics is the art of the possible, and Netanyahu seems to some of us sort of reckless compared to Sharon, who at the moment seems quite moderate. So whether it's political or a conviction is almost irrelevant. If he does adopt a certain line of thinking and of action, if it works, so much the better.
Very nice. You mentioned the Lebanon War, Anita. Could you describe the Lebanon War and Sharon's connection to it?
Well, in the early 80s, Menachem Begin was prime minister, and Sharon was his minister of defense. And there was a tremendous amount of activity from the PLO who were ensconced in Lebanon, and they were shelling the northern Israeli settlements, kibbutzes, whatever. And this was intolerable to them. So Sharon, I think, devised the plan of invading Lebanon. There's a great deal of controversy over exactly what happened. They ended up in Beirut. Many people think that Sharon went to Beirut without the proper agreement. That Begin's son says that Begin didn't know that Sharon was going to Beirut. I find that very difficult to believe. And I don't think Begin ever said that he didn't know that they were going to Beirut. But in any case, they went in there, and there was a tremendous amount of bombing, and because the PLO had ensconced themselves in that city. And they were finally removed by us. I mean, we finally got them out of there. But there were these two refugee camps, Sabra and Shatila. And Sharon was not there on the ground. He was in Jerusalem. I think most people think he was there, but he wasn't. There were some generals there, and then there were these Christian phalangists who were allies of the Israelis. And there was a man named Eli Hobeka. In any case, they went into the camp to root out what they thought were PLO terrorists, and they killed about 800 people, women, children, old people, men. It was a slaughter, and it caused a tremendous amount of difficulty for everybody. And Sharon's career was almost ruined on account of this.
You say in the book that Israel's north suffered greatly from the attacks on Lebanon over the years, escalating especially in 1982. And then you say that just before Israel's invasion in June, Philip Habib, the U.S. envoy, worked out a ceasefire. It seems to me that Israel's justification or lack of justification at that time for the invasion of Lebanon depends on the timing of the ceasefire, and the details aren't in the book about that ceasefire plan. On what date or time did the ceasefire take hold, and how long was it in effect before the invasion?
I don't think it ever took hold. I think it was another one of these American things that just, I mean, they just didn't stop. They're just, what was it that Gessen said something about, we're ceasing and they're firing?
Yeah, we're having a ceasefire. We're ceasing and they're firing.
But it didn't stop, so that's why they went in.
Tell me, you say that the enemy was a weak one capable of only harassment. Do you think that the Lebanon war was a just war?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I think in Sharon's eye it was, and in the eyes of many people who admire him it was. But whether it was just or not, it certainly ended up in a fiasco. There's no question about that. When they left under Ehud Barak, it was a disorderly withdrawal, and it gave the impression to Arabs that the Israelis were weak. And I think it's caused a lot of trouble. So, it's one of these entangled historical situations.
I agree, but wouldn't you say that with, more than the thousands of people that were injured, the 6,000 plus attacks in the last 10 years, the PA, says we don't support the terrorism, yet there have been literally over 6,000 attacks. Do you think that Sharon and Begin, they certainly seem to be justified to rid Israel of the threat of the PLO in 1982, 10 years before Oslo? Wouldn't you say that that itself, in Sharon's eyes, would be the justification for what happened, and certainly that the war in Lebanon, meaning, certainly wouldn't you think that if he had completed his job, we wouldn't have the problems we have today?
You mean if he destroyed the PLO?
If he destroyed the PLO completely at that time?
Yes, we would have probably fewer problems there, but of course the Americans rescued Arafat and took him to Tunis. I think every time they move, they always have to stop. Only lately they haven't stopped, but they've always stopped every time they go a certain way, and then they have to stop because of
it's a political necessity, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Sharon's entire life has been spent in part in a policy of deterrence. I mean, in the 50s, when he made all those forays into Jordan and tried to stop, terrorism in its place, he spent his whole life trying to do this. And as Anita said, he's never been able to finish the job, as it were, because he's always been stopped by some outside force.
Mm-hmm. Is Sharon ready to be prime minister once again? Is he ready to take the job to the end? Is he ready to finish the job and complete whatever process is necessary, whether it's the destruction of terrorism per se, or leading Israel to be the stronger leaders of the free world that they are in the Middle East? Or do you think that Sharon just wants to stay where he is as the leader of the state of Israel and continue to be the politician he is? Do you think he has greater dreams that he thinks he'll be able to accomplish, in other words?
I think what he wants is to secure Israel. And I think he has about as much idea about that as anyone. I mean, it doesn't depend on him. It depends on the forces around him. It depends on what the Palestinians do, what the Americans do. I think what he wants is security for his people. And I don't think he can go much beyond that because he's hampered in so many different ways. But I think he certainly wants to stay in as prime minister. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. That.
Yes.
Well, I think he thinks that his ideas are the best ideas to cope with the situation. No one knows. There is no plan as such. Nathan Sharansky did have an interesting column in Wall Street Journal a few months ago defining how he thought we could at least get started on a peace process by using Arab and UN money and building an infrastructure and so on over a period of years. But you don't hear these specific plans. You just hear talk about the occupation is what's causing all this violence. Well, of course, everyone knows that violence has been going on for decades, and it's got nothing to do with the occupation. The occupation has aggravated it and has complicated it, but it's an age-old problem.
It certainly is. This is so interesting, and we want to talk more. So stay with us right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug, and we'll be right back in just a couple.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am 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 an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I
am
an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am American.
I am America.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
On September 11th, America faced terrorist attacks of the worst kind. Innocent lives were lost, and a sad cloud was cast over this great nation. These acts were intended to cause fear among all Americans, including our children. But we cannot let that happen. There are things we can do to help our kids. Talk with them. Listen to them. Tell them they're safe and that they're loved. God bless you, and God bless America.
Welcome back. We're here at Taped with Rabbi Doug with authors Anita and Jordan Miller, authors of Sharon, Israel's Warrior Politician, a biography about Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel. And I wanted to ask you you mentioned Sabra and Shatila and the massacres. Tell me, what was Ariel Sharon's role in the specific happenings in those two places?
Well, I don't know. I'm not convinced that he had a specific role. He wasn't, as I said before, he wasn't on the ground there. And a couple of generals who've lately been interviewed, and Sigalit has translated this, have said that it was believed that those two camps were honeycombed with terrorists, with PLO people. And the generals let these Christian phalangists go in to clean them out. And supposedly they thought that there were 250 phalangists and there were 6,000 people in the camps. They thought that they would have to go in and rescue these Christians, where in actual fact this man, Eli Hobeka, went in there, I think, with the intention of murdering as many people as possible and came out covered with blood. Sharon was in Jerusalem at this time, and I can't, it's difficult to believe that he was told, these people are going to go in there and kill 800 innocent civilians. I mean, it seems inconceivable. And he's been accused of that. He sued Time magazine and actually won because they implied that he was in sort of, in cahoots with Hobeka. And he becomes extremely defensive and angry when he's asked about this, because there was an investigation, the Khan Commission, and he was held indirectly responsible because he was Minister of Defense. Well, indirectly responsible is very vague. I mean, how are you indirectly responsible for something?
You mentioned Time magazine. Our presumption is that he won that suit, but he was never awarded anything. Why is that?
No, they couldn't give him any money because of the sort of technical things, but they said quite clearly and specifically that Time magazine had definitely libeled him and that they had not proven their case. Mm-hmm. And when you read the details of the trial, you can see quite clearly that that all they had was the word of a sort of a peculiar reporter who and they sort of leapt on this, and it's been haunting him ever since.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You say Lebanon has been annexed by Syria, quoting Sharon, and it was center for the world of terrorism. The Lebanese Civil War began in 1975, and the world remained silent in the face of the massacre of the Lebanese Christians by the Muslims. You write, the Christians retaliated, attacked refugee camps, the Muslims and PLO, massacred the inhabitants, Syrians brutally murder the Christians, and the Christians were even killing rival Christians. So Sabra and Shatila did not really exist in a vacuum. Would you agree that the blame Sharon has taken for 20 years for mere political libel by Sharon's political enemies in Israel was the fact, and that anti-Semites among the Arabs abroad have also added to that libel or blame on Sharon? And do you think that Sharon bears any guilt at all for not taking charge and preventing such a thing from happening?
Well, I don't think he could.
That's a tough question. I know.
Well, I don't think he was in a position to take charge and prevent it, because that assumes that he knew in advance it was going to happen. And there's no evidence that he did. So I don't think he can be found culpable on that score.
But weren't the militias really in cahoots with the Israelis? Weren't they, weren't they working together in some way?
Yeah.
And so wasn't there some kind of the chain of command in such a thing? Didn't that lay on Ariel Sharon in some way?
Well, no,
I mean, people are saying it did, so I'm asking you, did it?
Yeah, no, I mean, the phalangists were their allies, and he had this hope that there would be a Christian state that he could work with in Lebanon, and he wanted to get rid of the PLO, and he hoped for a Christian state. The whole thing sort of deteriorated and fell apart. Couldn't control that. But I don't think that he had any conception that they were just going to go in there and murder innocent people. Right. How could he possibly know that? This Hobeka person, who was just murdered himself, about a year or so ago, was obviously a horrible sort of criminal. And but yes, the world often holds these Jews to a higher standard. I've heard, reporters and people say they must be held to a higher standard. So if anything happens like that, then it's got to be somebody's fault. And I think that Sharon has been a scapegoat in that affair.
And to expand on that, you just have to go on the internet and see how Sharon is excoriated and treated as a bloodlust monster. And I mean, it really is so excessive that you have to wonder what is the underlying motivation for all this.
Do you think the second Intifada, do you think that was actually something that Sharon was making a statement when he went up onto the Temple Mount and to the Har HaBayit, and he stepped up there? Was he making a statement that, yes, we can do this, and we don't care what you say, and that he may have been provoking in some way with his statement?
Well, I think that it was sort of a provocative thing to do. It was political. It was during the campaign, and he was running against Barak, and what he was saying was, see what happens. Jews should be allowed to go into East Jerusalem, and so I'm going into East Jerusalem. But he didn't actually provoke the Intifada. That we have some evidence in the book that was planned by Arafat in order to distract people from the fact that he turned down this generous Camp David offer that was given to him by Barak. Mm-hmm. It was planned for November, but when Sharon went on the Temple Mount in September, they just pushed up their timetable.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I've got to tell you, the book is most interesting. Sharon, Israel's Warrior Politician, written by Anita Miller, Jordan Miller, and Sigalit Zatouni. And I know that it's out there, and I know that people who are reading it are finding it as interesting as I did. I have so much more that I could ask you, but we're running out of time. So I just want to thank you both, Anita and Jordan, for being here on the show, and I wish you much success with your authoring and with this book and future endeavors. And just thank you again for being here. And I want to thank all of you, our viewers, for being here today. Remember, we're on every week at this time. Thanks again to my guests, Anita Miller and Jordan Miller, the authors of Sharon, Israel's Warrior Politician. And thank you, and hope to see you next time here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.